Good evening, everyone. It's created in the image of God, the role of religion in society. Welcome to the live stream. I'm here with Jacqueline Clare, who is an artist breaking new ground with her focus on spiritual realism. Want to make sure that we share some information about Jacqueline and what she's up to as we get into the show. But we've got a big topic for tonight, a topic that's been on the minds of many Americans for many months, starting when the leak happened, this unprecedented leak from the Supreme Court around the Roe v. Wade decision. So we'll get into that topic as we launch into the show tonight. And so let me first share, though, the number of the day, and you'll see how that relates in. The number of the day is 8 billion. 8 billion. And why is that the number of the day? Because somewhere on Earth today, the 8 billionth person has arrived on the planet, according to statisticians. Now, obviously, we don't know down to the minute measurement. Had an interesting discussion on Saturday about truth and how do you measure it and how do you really know. But for the sake of discussion today, we're going to state, based on this article that I read, that today is the day that the 8 billionth person arrived on this planet. And somewhere in the global south, possibly, though, as it said in the article from the Daily Scroll, which is a great source of news, by the way, could plop that in the chat sometime. She could just as well be born in Tucson, Arizona. I don't know why they chose that location. But November 15th is the day of 8 billion. The obsessive counters at the United Nations say most of the population growth over the next several decades will predominantly come from 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, including India, whose growing tally of 1.4 billion will soon put it over China as the world's most populous nation. And I do remember being in India in 2014, actually, to receive an award, which I'm very proud of. And while I was there, I was learning about how India had this massive amount of young people, and that between the ages of 15 and 25, right, they had the absolute largest segment of the world population, and literally the future of the planet in terms of sheer numbers is in India, and was involved in some stuff over there. Very intrigued and interested in how the culture and people of India are developing as far as the future of the planet goes. But that's another topic. 8 billion people on Earth today. So in that same light, we had a recent election, and I'm not referring to the US election, I'm actually referring to the election in Israel on November 1st. And the Israelis elected a government that was called by many historic, as in, quote, for the first time in its history, Israel will have an exclusively nationalistic and religious governing coalition. Now, when I use those terms in the context of a government, it almost sounds horrible, right? Exclusively nationalistic and religious. Like, this is the most horrible thing you could imagine for your government to be. And I raise this in the context of this show, created in the image of God, with its subtitle, The Role of Religion in Society. The role of religion in society. In the US, we have a government that emphasizes freedom of religion. And there's also a movement, literally founded, called Freedom from Religion, that thinks we should take it much further and we should remove all religion from civic life. But our government emphasizes freedom of religion, and many in the US and the West are averse to a government whose supporters would describe it as an exclusively nationalistic and religious governing coalition. But those words might be more nuanced than they appear on the surface, or than they appear in the ears of people on, let's say, one side of the political spectrum, right, who would view those terms in extremely negative terms, like there could not possibly be a healthy, positive form of patriotism, like there could not possibly be a healthy, positive form of religious observance among people in a democratic society that would want their government to reflect values of patriotism and religion. But this is something that now happened in Israel. And I use that as a kind of external data point to discuss what's happening here in America with our recent election and the polarization that has happened in this country. Political winds are blowing in similar swirls here in America as well around those topics. So the world is, as I could quote one quote, full of contending peoples who, in my humble opinion, are all being inexorably guided towards a submission to the commandments of God, surprisingly. Even though so many on earth today want to go in a different direction, it is my opinion that we are inexorably being guided towards submission to the commandments of God, the creator of the universe, who created a reality that naturally moves us in that direction, even though we may make progress by lurching forward from ditch to ditch. Ultimately, inevitably, we do conform to reality. We conform to the revelation of God by virtue of Him having created the entire universe for that purpose and as a revelation. If you believe in a God who is the creator of all things and who is the one who desires the best for his children, we can trust that he is inexorably leading us, despite sometimes our resistance, in the direction of submission to the laws that will bring happiness and peace. So, in that light, what are the issues that these contending peoples care about? What are the issues that are on the minds and hearts of American voters as they exited the polls? And this will lead us back to the main topic for today. 32% listed inflation as the biggest issue. Massive federal spending is certainly one major factor. And large economies are complex system of systems. We've addressed some ideas in prior shows, and I think we'll eventually come back to the topic of economics and what the Bible and other religious texts have to say about structuring economics in a way that lead to the ultimate happiness and fulfillment of the most people. But that's not the one today. We'd like to focus on the close second issue on that chart. And I'm going to share here an image, if I can find it and pull it up. Sorry. I will see what I can do here. I'm really sorry. I can't find this screenshot that I had handy. I will just have to read it. Actually, there may be a way for me to plop it in the show here. No, I'm not going to waste time doing it. Anyway, 32% said inflation and the economy. The second biggest topic, 27%, was, lo and behold, the issue of abortion. So there are, of course, many reasons why we in the West are bucking the trend towards population growth in terms of that 8 billion number. And a desire to control the population of the world may be one reason many people feel strongly about abortion or are inclined to want to fight for abortion rights. There are many others. I don't really want to get into the hearts, minds, and souls of those people who are advocating for the pro-choice position, which is a positive way of putting their choice, versus the pro-life position, which is a positive way of putting the anti-abortion lobby. But the pro-life position, by default, if you flip that, would be a pro-death position, right? Those who believe that abortion is not only acceptable, but that it is a universal right, that everyone has the right, every childbearing person has the right to terminate the life that is growing within them for whatever reason of their choice. One of those reasons may well be global population control. I could see how that might be one argument. So I'm going to now put our guest on the spot. Jacqueline, welcome. And just throw a question at you. Sorry for probably should have had you introduce yourself first before putting you in the hot seat. But Jacqueline, I'm just going to throw this question out at you. Is abortion a valid form of birth control in dealing with this 8 billion figure? Have people in the West perhaps chosen in their enlightened understanding of how to manage a growing population on a planet with finite resources and to keep that level down? Is abortion an acceptable form of birth control?
Mm-hmm. Well, are you asking me as an individual or from a religious context?
I'm not so well. Let me put it this way. I should have had you introduce yourself. We of course have known each other for some time now, and I had the opportunity of even attending your wedding and participating in it down there in Texas, which was wonderful. What was a fabulous experience. And I view you as a person of integrity whose personal decisions and views would be aligned with, your sense of what is right, your sense of what is true, your religious beliefs, your desire to adhere to a code of conduct personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that code of conduct really is in alignment with what ideally would be universally accepted, right?
Right. Well, I say that I am strongly pro-choice, that a woman should have full choice as to when and with whom she has sex with. So that is my personal view as it ties to abortion. And from a religious standpoint, informed from my faith, the Baha'i faith, it's definitely not an acceptable form of birth control. There may be medical cases where it is a medical choice, where there's like a life or death situation for the mother and the baby, and that's sadly a medical issue, but there's still the fact that the soul, from a religious, Baha'i inspired perspective, exists and is joined with the body at its tiniest form, so it is a soul, and being both material and soul, it is a person by, how we would define a person. So yeah, that's my view on abortion and choice.
Well, I think to to take a half a step back, because this is the role of religion in society, right? Actually, let me take a full step back and say, I recently watched a podcast in which a person was being attacked, and I may have mentioned this on last week's show. Now that I think about it, I can't remember. I was talking to somebody about it recently. I was watching a podcast where the person who had appeared on the Joe Rogan show was being attacked for having defended the pro-life position. No, he was actually talking about, I think he was talking about same-sex marriage. And he had defended the traditional view of marriage being between men and women. And he had not mentioned the Bible. He had not referred to, well, this is what God said in the Bible. And he was being attacked for not having done so. And his response was, why would I raise the Bible? Because most of the audience may not accept, first, that there's a God, and secondly, that the Bible is his word, right? And so I would now be talking not about the topic which I raised,
Mm-hmm.
which is same-sex marriage. I would now be talking about whether God exists or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to take a half step back and say, if I may, not to put words in your mouth or change what you said, a human being is what a human being is. Whether you believe that there's a soul or not, the laws are designed to protect human beings. Thou shalt not kill refers to human beings, right? And a fetus is a human being in development. It is a life, and as we know, that fetus can can survive outside the womb from a very young age. So whether or not there's a soul involved, which is more of a religious term and perhaps can't be measured by science.
Sure.
You follow me? So I now this show is created in the image of God. So we state that, but there are different religious interpretations about the soul, and there might be different religious interpretations about when the soul you know what I'm saying. So anyway,
Sure.
uh,
Sure. Well, I guess two somewhat tangential points here. I think part of it is how the topic is framed in the, political and social sphere. This is very much used as like a woman's issue or reproductive rights, and it makes it sound like it's all about people either care or don't care about the health of women and the quality of their life and that sort of thing. And I feel like that's very clever branding for the so-called pro-choice side, because it really evades the actual issue talking about. It's very rarely about women's health or their rights of any kind. It's about what to do with this, fetus. And I think that along with the idea of honoring the fetus as a life, it's also honoring the role and the purpose of sex in society, and that's a whole other rabbit hole of how we approach relations between men and women, and how we honor that, and how women honor themselves in that process. Like, to me, that's women's rights. That's caring about women's mental and physical health for both men and women, to honor women's childbearing capacity and our pair bonding and our, everything that goes along with, sex has been very like splintered, and so therefore we're losing the family, and we're losing abilities for people to have stable relationships, or young people to even start them. So the whole abortion thing, it's just like a little piece of this jigsaw puzzle that's dividing society.
thank you. I'm so glad that you went down that rabbit hole, as I think the term you used, because it's it opens up a whole arena of discussion, right? And when you, it's kind of like anytime you put a law in place, there are many unintended consequences, right? Or that law can be a litmus test of a whole host of issues that are going on once that law is established, right? So, for example, I live in Wisconsin, and we have a very high incarceration rate of African Americans, and many of them are drug related. And so there was one of the initiatives on the ballot was to legalize marijuana in Dane County, where I live. And that, again, that's another one of those kinds of issues. And you could say, well, the criminalization of marijuana is leading to black incarceration. And then you have systemic racism, where you can legitimately show scientifically that, all other factors being equal, a black person is much more likely to be convicted of the crime of possession of marijuana than a white person, and end up in jail as a result, for a whole host of issues that once you map it all out, you can clearly show that, for whatever reason, African Americans are subjected to harsher sentences and harsher punishments, you know, on an equality basis, i.e., racism. Um, but there are all kinds of cultural issues that are involved as well, that make it muddy, right? So this issue of abortion is very similar, and I love that you've gone there in terms of a woman's sexual choices, right? So, because what I heard you say is that I, as a woman, respecting myself, no, I would not ever use abortion as a form of birth control. I would make that decision upstream. Right? I would make that decision upstream, and I would manage my affairs in such a way that I didn't ever have to face that choice. Which doesn't mean you would never, under any circumstances, face that choice, which gets into exceptions. But no, it's not an acceptable form of birth control. The morning after pill, writ large, i.e., abortion, right? I don't know that the morning after pill is abortion, but you follow me? So, anyway, thoughts on how that plays out, and what reactions do you get in society from taking the position that no, I as a woman might make that decision further upstream?
Yeah. Well, privately in discussion with people, it might just be the circles that I run in, but people usually, under their breath agree with me. It's a very rational point of view, actually. It honors the biological reality and it honors the life of the fetus and all that. So I never butt heads with people on this issue. But again, that might just be the
That'll
circles.
change now after this show, right?
Yeah, maybe so. And I welcome that's fine. But I mean, I would say that it is radical to talk about um abstinence or chastity or discretion. I mean, it's just basically basic discretion. Um, but I don't think it is the least bit oppressive to women. I think it's quite liberating, and I think maybe women have to lead the charge in that arena. And then hopefully the men will respect it and follow. But I guess women have to lead in that. But yeah,
Well, isn't that traditionally the case, right? So traditionally, in societies that I'm familiar with, the burden of this issue was placed on the woman, and to a large degree in unfair ways, right? The woman was the one who had to resist and say no, because she was ultimately the one who was going to have to deal with the consequences. And there's many, it's a standard kind of old school scenario where the man skips out after he is participating in a woman's pregnancy, and wants nothing to do with the consequences of it, and then the woman lives with it, and her life is altered, and not necessarily for the better, as a result of that situation. And that was always put on the woman traditionally, and Roe v. Wade kind of gave another escape route, if you will, from that situation, to, in that sense, empower women, which is where the whole pro-choice thing comes from. So you're actually sort of advocating for a more traditional model that large portions of society have rejected. Which, by
yeah.
the way, I support and affirm. I love you taking that position. I'll share in a moment some stuff that I'm going through now that I have a 14-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
But I love that you're an example of how to resist that trend. But I wanted to highlight the historical trend of how it arose.
Yeah.
And
And some of the history there is very unfortunate. You know what I mean? I appreciate what Roe v. Wade was perhaps trying to mitigate, where women were unfairly burdened with stuff. Obviously, it's the man and the woman who are responsible for it. But yeah, I think um, we lose a lot by completely rejecting everything that seems traditional or religious or old fashioned. I think there's great beauty in honoring the sacredness of the sexual aspect of life, and then it makes your life a lot less complicated.
yep. So I want to highlight a point here, and then go to a couple of comments from our audience. The point
Good.
is, this show, created in the image of God, the role of religion in society, has spent months laying the groundwork that our opinion is, yes, religion plays a prominent, sometimes a dominant role in society, a dominant role in the creation of great civilizations. But religion should not be coercive. Where religion jumps the shark is where it becomes coercive and does not in that and no longer inspires individuals to change. You know, I could go off on a big tangent about that now, but I want to go to these two comments in that context. The first one um, from FA, we know who that is. Thank you so much for joining tonight. In Soviet Union, abortion is the method of choice for contraception. In Russia, the average woman has 9 terminations in her lifetime. I submit that this is an example of what happens when you do not have that influence of religion in society. The Soviet Union, by definition, was that massive political entity, which was an aggregation of many states. You know, in a sense, a competitor to the United States of America, which is one nation under God. And the Soviet Union had a religion founded on Marxism, in which Karl Marx in 1844 said religion is the opiate of the people. And they established a society with a secular religion called communism. And they banned religion for decades. I submit that this is one of the reasons why this is a factor in the Soviet Union. The second comment is, from a religious perspective, what are your thoughts about premarital sex? Well, from a religious perspective, premarital sex is forbidden. Sex is sacred in marriage. It's my personal opinion based on my study of the Bible. You don't find marriage ceremonies in the Bible. What you find you do find some examples of marriage ceremonies, but going way back, what you find is that the sex act was in fact what constituted a marriage, right? It's called consummation. The marriage was consummated, right? And in the Hebrew scriptures, you have rules where you had to, the sheets had to be produced after the wedding night that would show that consummation happened. And what does that even mean? Well, what it means is that there's a physical reality with, before and after the first sex act, in which there's blood involved, typically, historically. And this was a sign and a token that the woman was in fact a virgin on her wedding night, and that she now is no longer a virgin. And thus the marriage was consummated. So the sex act itself was the establishment of a marriage, and whoever you first had sex with, that was now your wedded partner. That is the whole basis of marriage, in my opinion, from the Bible. So, yes, from a religious perspective, it's very clear. Sex is only allowed in marriage, and this is the traditional religious view. And of course, if that were the case, a whole host of issues would not arise. The freedom to go a different path and to form a society where that is no longer a societal rule, no longer a cultural norm, and where every effort is made not only to not shame those who violate the norm, but to celebrate them. And increasingly, the further away that people get from that norm, the more they are celebrated. And there are movements that are enshrined with the word pride to emphasize and double down on that point, that the farther away from the religious standard that we move, the greater must be the, in my opinion, delusional affirmation that it is a better way. That, to use a religious image, that dancing around the golden calf while Moses is up on Mount Sinai is something to be celebrated, right? That basking under the glow of the rainbow, which was a sign that God would not punish the world with a great flood, basking under the sign of the rainbow as a sign of freedom to pursue whichever path one wants, particularly sexually, that is where we are as a society. Religion in society provides a different message. And I applaud those who have that same desire to say, well, I see that as a higher standard, not a lower standard. And I believe that good results come from striving to achieve that higher standard, which is not to say that religion should be coercive. And we have a multicultural society today. Religion should not dominate and force. We are given freedom of choice, going back to the Garden of Eden. But that inspirational view, and Jacqueline, I'm just so pleased to hear you say that in your view, that's an upstream decision that women should have. I'd love to hear a little bit more now, since I've been dominating as a male here and answering these questions. So how does that, what does that look like? How does that work? How do you, you know, express that in your life, perhaps as an example and a role model?
Oh gosh, thank you. It is not easy in today's world, that's for sure. And I also definitely agree that, like, what we're talking about here, spiritual moral principles, faith inspired, I am quite dubious that they can ever be legally guided or enforced in any successful way. I do think these ultimately have to come from individuals making the choice. I think it's kind of possibly a really good thing to have the option for all the candy in the store and choose something that's not going to give you a crash, like of your own volition. But yeah, as far as being an example, women do ask me this often, and it's not easy. It was not easy, and in my marriage, I'm really lucky that this guy that I dated, when I told him this is how it's going to be, this is what I believe, and I don't want to have sex or anything like it before we're married and that sort of thing, and he asked me, he said, like, well, what does this look like? Like, how do we do this? And I kind of said, I don't know. We're just gonna, figure it out and not. It basically, after that one conversation, we were just on the same page, and it was basically just honoring that choice, and that we weren't going to try to push any limits of what we'd established. We just decided that we were going to nurture a friendship, and we liked each other, but this was not something that we were playing with. And
Well, I love that. I love that you said, I don't know. We'll have to see how, because it immediately brought to mind these things that I'm aware of, because I'm of a previous generation. There was this thing called spooning, right? And they're literally, because societies, guess what? They have tried to manage this in the past,
yeah,
right? They have
right,
had people whose job it was to sort of manage singles through this, right? And including like the boards down the middle of beds where couples could like lay lay next to each other on the bed for whatever reason. I was always like funny to me. Like I don't know, I guess to in Western society, right, to sort of begin to get to know each other or share some form of intimacy while still protecting, like guardrails on the candy store, if you will, right?
right. And I don't recommend any of those things, and I don't think that works. And I think all that just is it's just kind of a waste of time, and it gets weirder and weirder. And I mean, I think that it has to go all the way back to what is the purpose of of a friendship with somebody of the opposite sex, and are you interested in this person being a potential marriage partner? And if so, all of the candy stuff can wait, and your time is very precious to be spent doing different things, talking about things, challenging yourself, interacting with other people. So it would be nice if there was like, oh, well, this is how you date and this is how you do it. But it really goes back to, what is the whole purpose of dating, and those conversations with your children and that sort of thing. And it is really hard nowadays, not only because society is so permissive, but also because there's not a lot of respect for marriage. And even in religious households, it's often considered sort of scandalous or taboo for your child to even consider marriage before they graduated from college with a degree or before they have a job. And I understand that, and I think it's sensible, and I also understand the historic context from that, where that's coming from, wanting people to be on their own feet, or wanting the women to have, something that makes them strong and independent. But it also puts I think, a pressure that is against biology on young people
Right.
to, to not honor,
Absolutely.
those instincts
Yeah.
are meant to be honored, and we have marriage as an outlet for it. And I know people on all ends of the spectrum will, be scandalized by some of these ideas, but I think that's just the way it is. And if I may, well, maybe we'll have another conversation about this. There's a tidbit I want to throw in, but maybe on a different conversation.
Well, let's just circle around on this. We talked for the audience. Jacqueline and I talked a little bit about the show, and we had an intro, and Jacqueline asked me then, well, where do we go from there? I'm like, after that, we wing it, right? We wing it, and so we'll just see where this goes. I love this question here from Planksip. Should societal norms be naturally coercive if they come from the Bible? I would submit that they are naturally coercive because they come from the Bible. It's my position that there are two great books of Revelation. One are the written word of God, which is God breathed, right? The Bible inspired by God, the word inspiration, right, from the term for breath. The Bible, those words are God breathed. They came from a divine source, and they were recorded by flawed human beings, meaning not that the words were flawed or that we can't trust them, but that they have to be understood from the perspective that the human beings at that time when they were received had certain concepts and certain words in their language, and the divine inspiration is limited in its expression to the words and concepts that could be understood and recorded by the people who received the revelation. But the point is, that's one source of revelation. That's the book of Revelation. Not literally the book of Revelation in the Bible, but the whole Bible and any holy writings that come from God. Baha'is would submit that the Baha'i writings the same, the Quran the same, right? The Hindu writings and the Zoroastrian writings, right, from a divine source. So the other book of Revelation is the creation itself, and there God is not limited or constrained by human beings, right? The creation of God is the perfect revelation. It is the fullest expression of God, not limited through one aspect of his creation, which is people at a point in time. The universe itself is the most full expression of the revelation of God. And so the Bible is a verbal expression of the realities of the universe. So, yes, they are naturally coercive on their own, but we go to enormous efforts to create a Disneyland like fantasy, right? This is, in my opinion, from my Baha'i friends, why the term vain imaginations and idle fancies so frequently occurs in the Baha'i writings, because we are at a stage in human history where our capacity to distort reality exceeds anything that could be done in the past. And this is the dominion that God gave us at creation, right? I have set you over all things. And David talks about, by all things, he withheld only a couple of things, the spiritual realm, right? We are submissive to the greater and lesser lights. We submit to the light. That's all we submit to. Everything else physically is under our feet. Even space travel is within our reach today. So the capacities that we were given by being created in the image of God, right? There's our title of our show, created in the image of God. The capacities we were given are so incredible. They are God-like, right? That's why he says, I created you in my image. They are God-like. We can control and master the creation, but we can do so in submission to the laws of God, or we can do so in opposition to them. We can try to take things in a direction that God, in his infinite wisdom, knows will not pan out, right? The school of hard knocks. So they are naturally coercive. Nature coerces us in the right direction. And I love the phrase, having lived in Germany for 10 years, that Germans have for certain diseases. They're called Zivilisationskrankheiten, which mean civilization diseases, because the Germans, in their studious, diligent efforts, could clearly see these are diseases of our own making. These diseases did not even exist. Cancer and heart disease did not exist at the scale and at the level until we created this Disneyland full of the candy in that candy store that Jacqueline was talking about, which we gorge ourselves on to our own hurt. And we establish an entire society that is far removed from the natural laws of the universe, which God put in place and which he revealed to us at stages in our development to warn us not to play with those things which were beyond our capacity to understand, which we were guaranteed to put the knife in the light socket because it seemed like a good idea to the 2-year-old, which in our curiosity, we were guaranteed to put our hand on that hot stove to see, is it really hot? And all kinds of examples that I could now give that we as human beings don't listen to the wise, calm instruction of God, but choose rather to explore on our own. And that's our right and our privilege. And so we lurch forward from ditch to ditch.
Yeah. There's a really beautiful concept from at least one, if not several, of the Narnia stories. And I think it was only one of the books. I don't remember which one, but basically Aslan gave Lucy some instruction. He told her what to do, and she didn't do it. And it was sort of a allegory of grace, like, everything still worked out okay, and he saved her, whatever the thing was. But he said to her, like, you'll never know what would have happened if you had done what I asked you to. And it just sort of gives me chills, this idea that we can stray from natural law, and go the school of hard knocks and still experience God in our life. And we fall down, hurt ourselves, and we realize our foolishness or whatever. Like, God will not abandon us, and we can all vouch for that. But you don't know what you are depriving yourself of when you don't just follow the divine teachings in the first place.
Amen. That's why it's called the fall traditionally, man's fall from grace. I'm not a fan of that. I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm not a fan of oversimplified sound bites, right? I'm not a fan of one-dimensional answers. But it speaks to the fact that one definition of the word sin is simply missing the mark, right? Imagine a marksman, with a bow and arrow is trying to shoot at a target, and then there's the bullseye. Sin is missing the mark. Sin is failing to achieve a standard, right? When we achieve that standard, good results come. To the degree that we miss the mark, the results are less and less and less. The further we get off the mark, the less good results we have. This is why in Deuteronomy chapter 30, in my opinion, God says very clearly, I set before you life and death. Therefore, choose life that you and your children may live. Right? There are consequences that build over time and aggregate over time, and the choice is ours. In that sense, God is not coercive. He just created this perfect playground, this Garden of Eden that is rich in rewards. Isn't it somewhere in the Baha'i writings that the twin pillars of civilization are reward and punishment? These are obviously built into the fabric of creation. And to the degree that we miss the mark, we have less of those rewards and more of the punishments. But it's a range of human experience. And to your point, if we're coercive, the lessons are not actually ever learned. They just result in teenage rebellion
Yes.
at an individual level, a cultural level, or a societal level, or a species level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in as a freshman in high school, my daughter, I hope she's not watching. She would surely not want me talking about this, but I will. So she was blessed with going to a Montessori school, um, through preschool through eighth grade. And because it was a small school, she had a close knit group of friends, and we knew all the parents. It's actually a very open, kind of liberal, if you will, educational environment, as opposed to, let's say, a conservative environment. Um, the motto of Maria Montessori was "Follow the child." That the educators must come to know and understand the ways in which a child learns, and must encourage and foster the child's love of learning, and let the child go where the child wants to go in terms of what it is that they want to learn. But we chose a school that was the AMI, which is the anyway, it's kind of more the European model. There's an American version, which is, in my view, even more lax, more open, more free, whereas the European model really does have those guardrails and certain structure boundaries within which the children must explore. So I thought it was a good balance. But it was a very small school. We knew all the parents. When she graduated from eighth grade, now she's in a much larger school. Her freshman class is twice the size of the whole school that she used to be in, which was preschool through eighth grade, right? And now she's suddenly got all these issues. And of course, teenager, and now, going out with friends, and that friendship that you talked about, where none of the kids in her school were remotely interested in dating each other, right? It was kind of like a joke that this small, close knit group of friends would date each other. They were friends. And when we did her eighth grade graduation party at our new house, new property with this pool, and it was just this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience to have all these boys and girls, young men, young women, together having fun. It reminded me of my college experience, which we have time. I might, answer that question about coercion and encouraging religious values. The way that we did dating in college, because it was a religious school, and you were not remotely allowed to hook up. I mean, basically, if you were caught kissing, you'd be expelled from school, right? At the college level. So it was an interesting social experiment. But now she's in that situation, and the whole dating thing, and it started with homecoming. It started with homecoming, like in the first few weeks of school, and the experiences that she had there. And I must admit a degree of terror as a father, right? Do I become that kind of dad that has a shotgun and threatens the boys that come over, right? What kind of dad should I be in this situation where my daughter needs role models to inspire her to resist what's going on around her in high school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that a question?
Well, it kind of is. What advice
Yeah.
would you give me and or my daughter here
Yeah,
in this
it's
light?
it's yeah, it's so challenging for sure. Well, I mean, she's so blessed to be in a home with two married parents. And hopefully there is
Married to each other as well.
yes. And I think, her wanting to have the experience her mom has, someone who, discovered a religion through her, was interested enough to go this deep, and who, so hopefully she sees something of a cherished and, married woman that is, makes her like want to be that one day. Um having that great model of masculinity and femininity in her home. And, I was thinking about this as you were asking me, as we were gearing up for the question. And, when I was 14, I wish that I had had more guidance as far as like, I knew I wanted to be married one day, but I kind of was picturing like a pop star. I wasn't really, it was, there was a disconnect between my real life and, the people around me, and then sort of what I was picturing for marriage in my life. And I wish I'd had a little bit more guidance about the actual qualities to look for in a marriage partner, that like he may not be, a millionaire yet or a pop star or whatever, but like, does he have a work ethic? Is he kind to you? Does he finish things? Stuff like that, to have more of a grounded mindset. But I'm also very aware that she's very young. 14 feels very young. And I know that the contemporary men, if they don't have fathers like you, probably are not going to be exhibiting those qualities for quite a while. So it is really hard. And and I just think the more, as long as she is getting like attention and validation at home, and so she's not like hungry or vulnerable for that, and she knows where her home is, I think she probably already has all the tools that she needs to navigate these waters. And she always has like a safe and open and respectful home, to come to.
So then let's flip it. What about, and thank you for that vote of confidence in my fathering abilities. And I would have to give the lion's share of credit for any positive features in my children to my better half, right? My amazing wife, Angela. But what about those girls who, like me, not that I was a girl, but I had religious training, but I had a really tumultuous childhood, right? Um, Alcoholic mother, state intervened because of what was going on in our house to take the children away from her. But this only happened after that had already been done by my dad, who kidnapped us from her and smuggled us out of the country. This tumultuous. I know what you're referring to in terms of, as Paul Simon said in Graceland, losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees it blown apart. Everybody sees the wind blow. And so when children don't have that stability, it's like they have a gaping hole in their heart. And it can be seen by others, including unscrupulous, who
Yeah.
whether they intentionally or not, identify that person as an easy target for whatever it is that they want. And they may themselves just be wanting that same love and attention, right? And so people hook up, right? And or worse. But what about those people, who don't remotely have the tools, as you said? And how does getting back to Roe v. Wade? How does a message from society, from the Supreme Court in our country, that says it is your unalienable right under all circumstances to make a choice and it's nobody else's business, right? Because I don't think that's, I think the Baha'i faith is perhaps more magnanimous, if you will, on this topic than the expression as understood from certain other religions, right? Although that's changed and shifted over time, but there's still within the Baha'i faith a clear message that yes, it's the woman's choice, but it's between her and her doctor, and the woman's choice should be educated by this religious instruction that says it's your choice, but here are some of the choices you should not make. You follow me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of a swirly question, but what I'm getting at is that you've got people who are, what other word can one use but just ignorant of this perspective, right? And I mean deeply, deeply ignorant at a heart level of of that inspirational desire to be different. They're deeply ignorant of the calling that a divine, loving Father, to put it in Christian terms, is saying, I call you to a higher standard, and the rewards will be great, right? Your cup will be full and running over with the blessing that I will pour out on you should you choose to try to adhere to the standard that I am calling you to.
Mhm.
How, how does one, sort of move in that direction in a world where you've got people militantly wanting Roe v. Wade to be put back in place as a federal guaranteed constitutional right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And that is a good point. It is about the federal aspect of it. This whole situation has been slightly misrepresented in the media that, oh my gosh, they're doing away with all of this, when that's not true. They're just kicking it to the states. Um, okay,
And
so
many
your
and
question.
many states have laws on the books that say it is a woman's choice. Many states already have a de facto version of Roe v. Wade in place, and
Right.
some of those states are even accused and misrepresented of the laws that are even on their books in this swirl of contending peoples.
Hmm. So
That's an
your
aside, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So your question is for people who haven't had the blessing of a healthy family upbringing and don't have religious
Well,
inspiration in their life. Is that your
thank you.
question?
Yeah, thank you for asking me to formulate my question more clearly. I will now do so. My question is, what can society do to encourage that aspect, which is there are blessings and benefits that come to you should you choose to go a different path? That because the messages, I mean, this has been a complaint against the media, right, for many decades, right? That TV shows, movies, songs are all like pressuring people like crazy in their youth to become sexually promiscuous. And that if they are not sexually active by who knows what age these days, that
Hmm.
they're really missing out, and they will never again be able to recover the lost joys of a misspent youth, right? How do we counteract that
Yeah. Well, I think
without
it's
being coercive?
right. I think it's honest conversations like these. I think it's happy families and marriages that shine in society. I think it's real challenging because it is innately, I guess, less glamorous, right? And I think that has something to do. I mean, to use
Well,
a
is it
Christian,
innately less glamorous? Because in the past, it was portrayed as more glamorous.
yeah,
And now
to
it's portrayed as less glamorous, but innately, is it innately less glamorous? Or is it innately more glamorous to be chaste?
well, I think it is spiritually. I think this is actually something I've talked to my husband about. Just all kinds of degeneracy seem to have a certain like sheen to them, and I think it is, to use like a Christian terminology, it's the deceiver. You have a really solid question, and I don't know exactly, again, other than these sort of honest discussions with young people in particular, um, and hopefully offering examples of alternatives. I think for women, having some role models that teach them to appreciate themselves and respect themselves. It bothers me to no end that like the most talented and financially successful and physically beautiful women in our society, like pop stars and movie stars and stuff, you know, literally will reach heights of fame on like actual talent, and then once they get there, to like keep it going, they literally use like stripper tactics and stuff. So it's like it's a very confused message of what we value in femininity. And it's like, well, why go to all that work if you could just be a stripper down the street? Like it's very confused.
Well, you remind me of, a few years ago you had Britney Spears followed closely by Christina Aguilera, right? And you watch this phenomenon of Britney Spears, and in order to be taken seriously, she had to, in my opinion, degrade herself. And
Hmm.
this gets to that point about a window in your heart, right? And people can see it. Everybody sees it blown apart. So she, in my opinion, is an example of how the manipulation of those in positions of power and respectability, power in the form of critics, right,
Yeah.
can coerce you to degrade yourself in order to achieve the affirmation that you want from people who do not have your best interest at heart. Again,
Hmm.
to use a Baha'i term, playthings of the ignorant, right?
Yeah.
Which, in some sense, is related to fashion, but also many other issues.
And I think it's very clear how that has not served her, and not to make this about celebrities, but I mean, she might have a lot of wealth and fame, but she's not an autonomous person, and she hasn't been able to be a mother, and all kinds of stuff. Um, and I even think, since we're talking about Roe v. Wade and abortion, I mean, even the biology of, the capacity for pregnancy is in itself, could be viewed as something to be extremely honored. Like that in itself shows you that you, to use sort of a silly phrase, like you are a magical being, and no matter what your upbringing was, and whatever the holes in your heart, like, um, obviously there's more to you than the capacity for pregnancy, but that is an indication of something, an amazing capacity. So that's a place that women can start, um, valuing themselves.
Well, and I'll probably get into trouble for saying this. Men and women both need that capacity, right? A man and a woman can have their heart blown apart, right? A
Yeah.
man or a woman can fall prey to all kinds of things. Celebration as a human being and a unique expression of the divine, whether male, whether female, right? And that upholding each of those two equally is important to solve this issue, because it's the marriage union that can create that life, right? It's the capacity, as it says in the Bible, for those two to become one flesh. They become one flesh, certainly, in the sense through the act of marriage, as I described it earlier, the consummation. But the fact that they then create a being that is a joining of the two, right? Yeah, it's magical that the mother is the bearer of that life, but it's that union that's magical, and that it has the male and the female component, and that is the aspirational, inspirational union that the woman, in that sense, is saving herself for. And it's a tragedy that it's never kind of been expressed historically, that the man has the same responsibility and opportunity.
Right.
There's an incredible double standard there, right? That has always existed throughout history. We had comments earlier in the chat about some of the things in the Bible that illustrate that hypocrisy, right? Had to do with concubines. I didn't share them. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you know, some of the explanations for why that is at the time, it was a tough world. There was a lot of war. You had more women than men because women didn't go to war, right? And you had a population imbalance, so you had all these women who didn't have remotely the opportunity to have that because there were no men. If you had 60 men, excuse me, if you had 40 men and 60 women, 20 women are never going to have that opportunity. You
And
follow
there
me?
was no other way for the women to survive practically and
True,
financially.
exactly, exactly. But the highest, I mean, that's the messy reality, right? That's the degrading part. But the inspirational, aspirational part is that holy matrimony, right? That magical ability to form a union and create a new life. And the highest and best standard, the bullseye on the target, the only way to achieve that without being sinful was one man, one woman. And all society missed the mark. So you come up with these alternate methods that kind of get closer. You know, you're not in the bullseye now, you're in the next ring, the next ring, the next ring. Today we have the technological capacity to say, yeah, we're close to transplanting a womb into a man and he can now be a woman, right? And in my opinion, you're getting way, you're not even on the target, but it's that inspirational, aspirational ideal of one man and one woman saving themselves for that holy union and then creating a life and a family unit that inherits all of that wealth of character that has been built, of virtues that have been built, of good and holy deeds and acts that were built by the man and the woman leading up to the maturing of the flower, if you will, and the ability to then produce a life. We can't emphasize, I think, the magical aspect of the woman in a vacuum. And I get why it may be necessary, but you've got to inspire the man and the woman to strive for that ideal. And I'm not remotely
Yeah.
criticizing anything you said. I'm just thinking in terms of the aspirational, inspirational power of religion versus the coercive aspect that we default to. We
Hmm.
default to the coercive aspect because we haven't been able to achieve the inspirational aspect of it.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think it's also on, you know, all of us, parents and future parents and so forth, to God willing, have families and marriages that though nitty gritty and real, offer inspiration for young people too, because that's part of it. So much disillusionment with the institution. So why go through all that trouble and all that stuff? So that it's all interconnected.
Well, this brings up an interesting aspect, which might be a good one to conclude on. There's one more comment too I want to show here and discuss for a minute, but um, and we talked a little bit about Hollywood. We talked a little bit about stars. Let's talk for a moment about image and the creation of that sort of that glamour. I think was one word you used, right? So society has often built in this in terms of their culture, their tradition, right? You think of the way in which marriage is celebrated around the planet. There's always a lot of effort that goes into um, creating that glamorous moment that celebrates publicly this very private union, right? So you might call it just the trappings of that union that are a major event in most cultures, right? That wedding ceremony that, you know, I guess little girls, perhaps more than little boys, have traditionally grown up, seeing that wedding dress in the window and having that sort of aspiration because of the trappings of it, right? And I don't mean to say that negatively, but I just mean to say that it's not the real thing, right? But it's the thing that people see. And so to what degree do we need to go to effort? And I'm even talking about the husband and the wife go to efforts to show their children the ideal that is not always the messy reality, right? You
Hmm.
know, we in this culture are so apathetic and lax that we just let it all hang out, and we take pride in letting it all hang out. You follow me? But there's something to be said for creating that aspirational image. What are your thoughts on that? Especially as an artist, I failed to mention your artistic work and the spiritual aspect of your art. And I definitely want to make sure that people know where they can find you, learn more about you, and the work that you're doing when you're not on this show, which is most of the time.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, for sure. Well, they can look me up, Jacqueline Claire or Jacqueline Claire Art, and I have a active YouTube channel and podcast called Spiritual Conversation, or any social media at JacquelineClaireArt.com. Yeah, I think that it's important that it be as real and genuine as possible. So we're not just projecting an image to children or our neighborhood or whatever. But I love the idea of not being overly casual, right? And honoring our role as the feminine anchor, the masculine anchor in a in our holy matrimony, you know. And I think it is really important for children to see that the beauty of that union, and how both sides of that polarity love and appreciate the qualities of the other, you know. That little boys see how much mom, you know, that soft nurturing feminine side appreciates the stuff that dad does, you know, and vice versa. I think that's extremely paramount. And that's also a whole other conversation. You know, we, before the trans movement really took off the ground, we had a couple of decades of sort of gender neutralism, you know. And I don't think that's been helpful either. I think it paved the way for this deepening of confusion. And you see, you know, this pride and the rainbow and everything, all of these movements to stray from this natural and very simple order. What do they want to do? They want to be able to get married and have families, right? They go so far that they want to have the rights to have something that emulates a traditional family. And now we have, you know, men transitioning to women wanting to be mothers. Like, no matter how far they go, it seems like there is this natural desire, imperative to return to the Garden of Eden, to have this straightforward union that creates a family.
Yeah, Joni Mitchell, and her song Woodstock, right, which was popularized by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Um, I want to just throw a couple of comments out here. This one was interesting. Reward and punishment, Skinner's behavioralism was debunked by Chomsky. I responded in the chat, how so? In what way debunked? This is an example of how I don't like these one-dimensional sound bites. Um, I'm sure there were specific aspects that Chomsky targeted and attacked and discredited, and probably rightly so. But I don't know that this is true. And I'd love to have this discussion in more depth sometime. One more.
Debunked, debunked is always a red flag.
What? Debunked? Yeah, I'm joking now. Debunked, right?
So
Debunked.
yeah.
No, you're right. It's like, yeah, it's like fact check that, right? Fact, now it's fact checked, right? Now it's been permanently determined, right? Um, I'm laughing because I posted something on Facebook about Facebook having received the biggest election campaign violation fine in history. And I said, fact check this, Facebook. And lo and behold, even though a lot of my posts are getting fact checked these days, there was nothing, no fact check. But interestingly, also, nobody saw it. Nobody saw it. It wasn't fact checked, but nobody saw it. Interesting, huh? Anyway, here's another one. You're missing the hormonal surge that occurs in adolescence. From an evolutionary point of view, These were the peoples that had the genes continue before the other humans who waited. Very interesting comment, right? So this is an interesting aspect. I'd love to, at some point when big science really matures, to what degree does that downward trend, that trend towards sin, right? That trend towards missing the mark, to what degree is that inertia baked in human achievement, right? So in physics, in science, inertia is a fact of physics, right? Everything, slows down over time. Everything, decomposes and tends towards chaos over time, right? um what aspects of that are built into human civilization, in my view, has always been that inspirational, aspirational can be quickly described in. I'm I'm not a fan of one-dimensional sound bites, but I use them all the time. I confess I'm a hypocrite on this point, but they're useful for a starting point. I don't necessarily mean to prove this with it. Any dead salmon can float downstream. It takes a live one to swim upstream and actually be able to spawn. And I lived in Alaska, done some salmon fishing. I know how this works out in nature, right? To what degree did God actually structure the universe such that unless you strive, unless you, like a tree, have your roots planted in the dirty soil but grow towards the light, to the degree that we as humans exercise our God-given capacity and develop our spiritual muscles and cultivate the virtues that lead us forward, if we don't exert effort at all times, we will be like that dead salmon floating downstream. So yeah, this is an interesting point. This hormonal surge, would cause the fertilization of the DNA to expand rapidly of those who don't strive towards um, that standard. But they also say that cream rises to the top. And I think, Jacqueline, what you talked about earlier, and this is maybe a good point to conclude on, is setting that example, that role model to become an inspiration. And knowing you, Jacqueline, I mean, and your work, I was just so honored and pleased to have met you and to have had the chance to get to know you, to get to know your husband, to get to see what you're doing down there in Texas on your property. We can get into that in future shows, but indeed, you are, a great example of striving towards that light, seeking to fulfill the standards. And I'm not just trying to, embarrass you here and, turn your cheeks red, but I see that, and I think the rest of the audience see it, and hopefully, some of them will check out your work and some of the podcasts that you're doing as well. What comments do you have for us as we wrap up and conclude tonight?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I love that about the cream rising to the top. That's a great point and a really good reminder of, and also, I think people should be encouraged to marry young. That's another part of it. So both are true. It's not really in your hands when you find someone that you would be a good fit for. But I think the more young people are guided and inspired for that and understand these principles, I think, God designed the biology perhaps to challenge us and make us stronger, but also as indicators,
Well, it's interesting because, and this gets into a whole nother topic, but it ties into Roe v. Wade and what was intended to accomplish, to empower women, to give them that choice. And there's this idea of equality with men that, in my opinion, is woefully misunderstood. Right. So let me tee this up in this way. Again, going back to my college experience, where we had this social experiment of, the motto for our college was recapturing true values, and the college auditorium was dedicated to the honor and glory of the great God. And everyone, it was a liberal arts university, but everyone had to study the Bible and take Bible classes. But you could major in other things as well. but the rules were really strict, right? And one of them, it's kind of humorous, was we were told to date widely. And I remember my friend Joe Daly got a shirt that T-shirt printed up said, "Hi, I'm widely."
That's
So
cute. That's funny.
so we were supposed to date widely. In other words, form many friends and relationships, and get to know all kinds of different people to do what you said, which is to figure out who you are, what you like, what works, what doesn't work. And you were basically forbidden to pair up and date steady. You would get called into the dean of students office and counseled, what are you doing here, right? And oh shoot, now I lost my train of thought. So
Forbidden to pair up.
yeah, no, it was before that. It was uh horrible. Um
Sounded like such an interesting story.
well, it was. So this social experiment, right? And learning how to manage through this situation. But before that, we were talking about this biology and oh no, I know what it was. So it had to do with the equality of men and women, right? And so my point is, I got off on that tangent because one of the other things that we talked about was mutually excelling each other. And we use this term. So competition was allowed. We had sports and competition was fine, but it was de-emphasized in that we were trying to mutually excel each other and spur each other on to do better, right? And there were three campuses, one in England, one in Texas, one in California. And there was competition between the campuses. And the goal was that the thing was that they mutually excelled each other. We celebrated the diverse characteristics that they mutually excelled each other. This was good and this was good. And we didn't, try to put one of them down, right? And so this thing about equality of men and women, right? What is one reason that people are getting married later? Well, materialism, right? You think you have to have everything perfect. You have to have this, and this in place, and no man can win a woman unless he could bring this to the table traditionally. And then more recently, women have to fully establish their own career before they could even think about childbirth because they will get derailed and they will not be equal with a man because by definition, you kind of can't force that, right? There's science shows us that it takes kind of 10 years to master something. And so if you're going into a field in a career and you're a man and a woman is taking care of a young child at home, which I believe is an appropriate role for women, to be the primary caregiver in those early years and to make sure that that child has that nurturing mother as an example. And I think not having that is horrible and a tragedy. And I'm not saying that because I want to deprive women of everything, but to rather grant them hopefully what is the greatest fulfillment in their life and that bonding, right? But now you can't compete equally because it just doesn't work. You have to go through all these mental and psychological and societal gymnastics to have these two different tracks somehow equal out on some false measurement, right? You have to, business 101, you get what you measure, right? And so by establishing a standard and saying, legally and societally, men and women have to be absolutely equal on this standard, it's bullshit. And it doesn't work. And so one of the things that you get is this fantasy world in which people don't get married until their 30s and everybody thinks that's normal and natural. And it's not. And as a result, of course, you have, all kinds of sexual freedom to compensate for the fact that people aren't getting married. So the entire structure of society is FUBAR. For those who know what that acronym stands for. And it's really a challenge. And religion can't be coercive. So we see this slip sliding of all kinds of societal norms, and we deceive ourselves into thinking that this is normal and natural, and we don't know which way is up and we don't know which way is down, and we can't sort it out, and we're not willing to go to the revelation of the Word of God to educate ourselves into how to use the Garden of Eden. And like Adam and Eve, we're insistent on choosing the path that seems right to us. Rather than listening to the guidance, it's, well, you should really try it this way. And that gets back to the debunked statement, right? To what degree was it debunked? What exactly was debunked? Which aspects of it were debunked, right? And or did maybe these two theories mutually excel each other? There are some aspects of this that are valid and right, and there's some aspects of this new idea that supposedly debunked that other idea that are good and right. And we need to find a way to marry and merge these things into a new holistic theory.
For sure.
So, what are your thoughts on that? You know, women's equality and how abortion plays into that, and some of those that swirl of ideas and commentary that I just threw out there. Any
Yeah.
thoughts or reaction to that?
Yeah. Well, just that I agree, and I think it's good for both sides to be honoring that the process there.
So we've got a last word. I'll let Planksip have the last word for tonight. Not debunked, proven wrong. Thank you. Um, I'd like to know what hypothesis was proven wrong.
You definitely don't want to argue with Noam. If he said it, it must be
Right,
right.
right. Or what conclusion was proven wrong, or what aspects, right? And Noam Chomsky is a very, very sophisticated and intelligent scholar. I have read some of his work, and I'm a fan of some of his work. And I could probably debunk a statement or two of his from time to time. So, what let's follow up on that discussion, on behavioralism, because it gets to the heart and core, really, of this idea of coercion, right? So, I think if we juxtapose the concept of coercion, and perhaps I'll throw this out there as we end. We Yeah, well, I'm not going to say this tonight. It's also off on a tangent. We'll save it for a future show. So, the hypothesis of behaviorism, right, is what was debunked or proven wrong. Okay, well, we will dive into that. I'd like to see a summary of what is behaviorism, right? Um, yeah, what exactly was debunked or proven wrong? That's going to be an interesting discussion from which I will most certainly learn something. So, Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining me once again. I put the chat. I put the links in the chat. You can click on them. I'll share them here again for Jacqueline. She's doing some great work, both in terms of her art and also her YouTube podcasts. I'm very, very grateful that you were here with us. I didn't even mention our other regular guest. It's kind of funny. Jack, E, and Jill, right? Jack and Jill, um, two regular guests that we've had recently. Jill, I didn't realize it. She's actually in Jamaica, or close to being in Jamaica on a family vacation.
Cool.
She sent me a little video earlier of her son Will, who's in this device where air is blowing up and you're literally like flying in the air, like in free fall. It was so cool. I got to go share that with my son now, who's going to be insanely jealous. So, Jill, we missed you tonight. Would have loved to have had your thoughts and comments on this. Hope that not sure if it's a lengthy extended vacation or a short one, whether you'll be back with us next week. But please do subscribe, click, link, share. Hope to have you back next week, where we will talk about something else, which you will hopefully find interesting and fascinating. Thank you, Jacqueline, for being with us. And thank you to our audience and all those who commented. Looking forward to continuing this discussion and dialogue.